Hello, everyone. I'm Joyce Coleman. I'm the Executive Director of the Vasquez Foundation. I know many of you, and it's so great to see you. I just wanted to welcome you to tonight. So thank you again for joining us. And I'd like to welcome our facilitator is Elizabeth Cottrell. And Elizabeth, you have the most fascinating bio. So I'm just going to read a short bio, and then I told somebody I would love to just chat with you about it, but I know you have a plan. So Elizabeth's career has taken her from published leprosy researcher to stay-at-home mother to community activist and leader, serving on nonprofit and corporate boards, to a freelance writer, editor, and blogger at heartspoken.com. Above all, she is a connector and encourager whose expertise and passion for note writing became a book, Heartspoken: How to Write Notes That Connect, Comfort, Encourage, and Inspire, which came about during the COVID pandemic, which had us scrambling for many, many different ways to stay connected. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I yield the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Joyce. I'm delighted to be here, and I want this to be informal. And I gather you're muted, but if you want to raise your hand and let Ed unmute you, that would be fine. Or certainly put a question in the chat. So Joyce, because one of the things I think we had talked about was after this is over, they'll get the handouts that I had. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just so you'll know, I have a handout for a thank you note checklist, sympathy note checklist, and then another handout that's just got like 25 totally random fun prompts for writing notes and letters. So one of the problems with writing a book called Heartspoken: How to Write Notes that Connect, Comfort, Encourage, and Inspire is that people immediately get on a guilt trip and they think I'm going to guilt them into writing more notes. And particularly, I've gone to a lot of civic groups, and the men usually are there with their arms, folded like this, and the wives are anxiously looking with great expectation. But the message of my book really is, while there's no question that I love handwritten notes, the operative word is heartspoken, and there are a lot of ways to convey heartspoken messages besides handwritten. So let me just, if you're afraid I'm gonna preach to you about that, just rest assured that's not what we're gonna do. It came about, my book, because I believe we are hardwired for connection, and for me, the 4 essential connections of my life, and I call it my heartspoken life, are my connection with God, my connection with others, my connection with self, and my connection with nature. And I find that almost always, if I am going through a rough patch, if I'm just having a kind of a bad time for whatever reason, I can almost always drill down and identify one or more of those 4 essential connections that can use a little work. And I know that I don't know much about vasculitis. I've looked it up, but I'm sure that in many ways it can be limiting, it can be isolating. And so the bigger part of our conversation tonight is going to be about what we can do that's easy, that's fun, that's convenient to strengthen the connections in our life, and specifically to use note writing and perhaps journaling as a therapeutic connection tool. Some of the research that's been done, it used to be this was anecdotal. People talked about, and it's kind of sort of something you have a sense about. But recent research by 2 main sources, one is Dr. Brene Brown. Many of you may have either read her books or watched one or more of her TED Talks. She has done amazing, just interviewed thousands and thousands of people on vulnerability, on connection, on resilience, and has come up with some really helpful and very concrete research results. The other organization that has done a lot of biological, physiological research is the Heart Math Institute. And so there's now a lot of evidence to support the knowledge, the notion that connection really is important. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why. Why is it important for our health and well-being? Well, it certainly provides emotional support. When you have a network of supportive individuals that can provide emotional sustenance during tough times, it makes a difference. Connection provides a sort of a foundation of shared experiences. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to a high school or college reunion. The first one I went to, I was terrified. But what I found was that that we had more in common than I realized. And there was sort of like a pool of experience from having gone to school together that you don't have to go back and rehash that. You have that in common, and it's the basis for a very strong connection. Connection's also great for increasing knowledge. This is especially true in families. When you share your stories, you share your memories, you share your values. This increases knowledge about managing your life and living with the challenges that you have. And then the last thing, as we've talked about, is connection reduces isolation. It reduces the feelings that you're by yourself, which can often be prevalent when you have a chronic condition. So let me just share a story about why there was a light bulb moment for me when writing notes was more than just good manners. Obviously, I'm of the age I was taught that. My grandmothers, my mother were all wonderful note writers, and it was the right thing to do. But the day that I got a letter from a stranger whose son had just taken his own life was a real conversion moment for me. I didn't know her. I didn't know her son, but I knew her son's fiance. And when I heard about it, I had written to the fiance to just express my deep sorrow and let her know I was thinking about her. Have no idea what I said, but apparently she sent my note to her mother-in-law, or future mother-in-law. And the mother wrote me the most anguished, beautiful note and said, "I've read your note 25 times. It just saved me at the worst time in my life." And at that moment, I just had this crystal clear idea that writing notes was way more than just nice manners, that it was powerful, that it had a ripple effect. I hadn't even written directly to that person. I'd written to somebody else. So since that kind of hit my consciousness, I hear stories from other people where a letter has made a big impact in their life. And so it's just sort of a message. I call it the HEARTSPOKEN movement, that I'm trying to just remind people that they have this power at their fingertips. And I'm going to be bold enough to say that pen and paper or keypad and computer or whatever mechanism, tool, way you use it, it's not just a tool, it's a superpower. And I think using it effectively is going to be the closest most of us will ever come to being a superhero. To reach out to somebody, you can record it. We're going to talk a little bit later about alternatives to handwriting, but there's just nothing quite like a handwritten note when you can do it. It's a personal touch. It takes a little time, so people know before they even read what you've written that you took the time to reach out and let them know you were thinking about them. It's a great way to express emotions. It's therapeutic for you and for the recipient, and it creates bonds that of encouragement and caring that you just are just so unique. Another big thing for those who do have limitations and a chronic illness, it gets you out of yourself. When you can think about someone else, and I love the quote, and it's attributed to Carl Menninger, who was a psychiatrist in the 1900s. He said, if you feel a nervous breakdown coming on, go out of your door, cross the tracks, and help someone. And I think we've all had that experience, that when we do something for somebody else, even something small, it does kind of get us out of ourselves. And and helps them and us at the same time. So I wanted to also talk about journaling. And journaling to me is writing notes that you won't mail. And it can be an extremely therapeutic practice for really, gosh, all four of the essential connections. It can be a prayer journal in which you will work on strengthening your relationship with God. It can just be a journal where you are recording what has happened in your life and talking about other people. It can be a self-reflective journal where you're learning about yourself, what brings you joy, what brings you sadness. There's a wonderful book called From Me to You that is written by two British people, a young woman and an older guy who knew each other very superficially, but he got cancer and she said, "Oh, I'll write to you." And over time, she wrote to him, and he also kept a diary. And the book is her letters and his diary, and the combination is just a very poignant, beautiful sort of testament to how a relationship can develop. And it was not a romantic relationship at all; it was just friends. But it was it's a lovely book. You can also track your health with a journal. You can manage your stress with a journal. And so I think you can set goals and monitor them that way. So journaling may be something, if you're not terribly inclined to write notes, you might consider doing that just as a way of getting things out of your head and that you're stewing about and getting them on paper. I wanted to talk about a few alternatives to handwriting, whether you've got a mobility impairment, arthritis, or perhaps just don't like writing notes. That's okay. Fortunately, technology is our friend here. And so there are, voice-to-text applications. Most of us have cell phones and computers that have, or tablets that have a little microphone icon, and if you click that, you can record messages and then send them by email or by text message. One fun way, especially to communicate with young children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, is video or FaceTime or one of those softwares. And they're all kind. I'm sure that the Vasculitis Foundation has a great place for resources. Occupational resources that have all sorts of adaptive tools for helping people that have mobility impairments or other, vision impairments, anything else that might be sort of in your way, but you still want to do it. I noticed that the arthritisfoundation.org has got some product recommendations, and another source is a place called AbleNet, and I believe it's .com, ablenetinc.com. And they have a lot of resources, ergonomic pens, writing boards, magnetic boards, key guards, alternative keyboards, that kind of thing. So I think we can sort of skip over the thank you notes and sympathy notes, although I do want to give you, I promised I would give you my formula for writing notes. And the secret formula is the acronym NOTES. And I'm just going to read it from my book because I don't want to forget anything. But N is for natural. Just be yourself. Pretend like the person is across from the kitchen table having a cup of coffee with you. And the O is for open. And that to me is just to take, particularly in a difficult note, like a sympathy note, just to take a moment to open your heart to guidance and to just believe that the words will come. T is for tell. And that's, people love stories. If you've got a story to tell, if you've got a memory to share, when you're writing a thank you note, tell them whatever kind of note you're writing, tell them why you're writing, instead of just thank you for the gift, thank you for the lovely blue bowl. And Joyce and I were just talking about how she had to do that when she was growing up. E is for empathize. And so if you can put yourself in the position of the person getting that note out of the mailbox and reading it, how do you want them to feel? And when you can think about that, sometimes it will help the words flow. And the last is S, notes, for share. Share how you're really feeling, share memories, share stories. I wrote to a great aunt one time after her husband died, and I said, well, I just remember Uncle Jim taking me fishing, and he just got the biggest kick out of the shoe that I caught in the pond instead of a fish. And it seemed to mean a lot to her that I had that memory of him. So, and I also wanted to just remind you, and you've probably heard the quote, it's attributed to Maya Angelou, but she says she didn't say it, she didn't originate it. But people don't remember what you said, but they do remember how you made them feel. And so when you start stressing about what am I going to say, am I going to say the right thing, you really don't need to, because it doesn't matter. It within reason, it doesn't matter. And you can make somebody's day by sending them a note. I also promised I would share with you some sort of out of the box reasons to write a note. We all know about the thank you notes and sympathy notes, and I hope that the checklist that they're going to send you will be helpful for that. Holiday cards and birthday cards. I think I know for me, when I receive a note that I wasn't expecting, it's even more special. So for just impromptu reasons to write notes is great. But here are some of the reasons I mentioned in my book that for writing a note: ministries and causes, to let people know that you believe in their ministry and appreciate the work that they're doing for whatever cause. Fan mail. I have reached out to authors that I love, poets, sometimes even stars, but it's very difficult to get a hold of a big time movie star. But you'd be surprised, even sort of fairly well-known writers don't get that much fan mail, and they really appreciate it. Notes to strangers. I have kind of gotten in the habit of paying attention when I read the newspaper. And when somebody has gotten an award or something extremely noteworthy, I will write to them. I look for news about my friends' children. Are they valedictorian? Have they been the high scorer in a ball game? And then I write to the parents, and if I think it's appropriate, I'll write to the children. We talked about journaling, but I've actually known people that write notes to themselves and tuck them away to read later. This can be something like writing a New Year's letter to yourself and pulling it out in June or the end of the year to see how you've done. But there's some real self-therapy there for that. There's an author named Elena Zaiman, Z-A-I-M-A-N, and she's written a book called The Forever Letter. And it's a letter that's really sort of your legacy in letter form. And it can be anything you want it to be, but it is your things you want your heirs, your children, your family to know. And I love that term. There are letters that you ask to be delivered after you're gone, and that's okay too. Sometimes that's a letter of I forgive you. Sometimes it's and I'm sorry, please forgive me. But those are sort of out of the box kind of letters. And then there's letters you may never mail. And the most wonderful story about that is Abraham Lincoln. And he, of course, is known for having surrounded himself in his cabinet with people who disagreed with him, and he didn't even like that much, but he thought to keep his enemies close. But apparently he got quite provoked with them from time to time, and would just go to his desk and write scathing notes. And when he died, they found a whole stack of notes, and it said, "These are not to be mailed. These are not to be delivered." Now, I promised also to share with you some unusual situations for which I've written notes. And I think sometimes when you encounter a situation that's embarrassing or awkward or tragic, you may feel like it's just too difficult. But here are some times that I have reached out. I went back through my archives. I wrote to a church friend one time who was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. It just seemed like whether they had done something wrong, but I wanted them to know that they were cared about. I wrote to a relative whose wife asked him to leave until he could control his drinking. I wrote to a friend accused of by an employee of improperly spying on them. That was a very sort of salacious situation. And I didn't write to say it's okay. I just wrote to say, I hate that this is happening, and I hope that you can find your way through it. I wrote to a community leader during some highly publicized and embarrassing financial difficulties. And he wrote later with just a beautiful expression of appreciation. I wrote to a relative who was in prison for embezzlement. I wrote to a widower here after his wife was murdered. And I often write to political candidates when there's a very contentious campaign going on, to remind them that whether they win or they lose, particularly if they win, that they represent everybody and not just their own supporters, and that I hope that they will remember that when they get elected. So I wanted to just share a few, if you sort of feel, hey, I'd like to be a better note writer, I'd like to sort of get more in the habit. There's just 2 or 3 very easy things that will make it a little more likely. One is to make it convenient. If you have to run around the house and find pen and paper and stamps and addresses, and every time you want to write a note, at least I just wouldn't do it. So keeping those things sort of in one place on your desk or in a tote or something like that makes it convenient. Make it fun. So if you're artistic, people love getting little sketches inside a note. If you're not artistic, I am not. I use stickers and cut out things from magazines and sort of glue them into some of my correspondence. I also think most people enjoy having the customized stationery, whether it's formal or whimsical. But that also, having your name already on it with your return address can make it a lot more convenient and fun. Kind of like if you're trying to get any kind of habit going, just make it easier, make it more convenient. And I also just wanted to invite you to join a Facebook group that I have. It's free. It's called The Art of the Heartspoken Note. And you have to apply, but everybody's accepted. And reason it's private is just we want people to feel that they can share questions and share specifics about any kind of challenges they have with note writing. But we have so much fun, and there are people that approach note writing from every angle. We've got artists, we've got people that are stamp collectors, we've got people that they don't really like to write a lot, but they love collecting fountain pens, or they love paper or whatever. I often say that I'm not one of those that's tempted by a shoe store, but boy, take me in a stationery store and I'm in big trouble. So I just wanted to, I hope that kind of shares with you why I have such a passion for note writing and why I think that it can be a therapeutic tool for yourself and for others. And I would be delighted to answer specific questions or make any recommendations, or I'd love to hear if you have any particular challenges with note or letter writing, or any experience or letters that you've gotten that have meant a lot to you.
So Elizabeth, I'll start. Do you practice when you're writing a difficult letter? Do you practice, or are you pretty good at just writing it? I write drafts.
That's a great question. And it depends, of course, but yes, I often write a draft. And the more I do it, the less often I do it. I have to write a draft now, but I do that. And I also, of course, I work from home, so I have an office with a copy machine, but I keep copies of things that I think I might want to look at later. And of course, when you're writing like sympathy notes, you can use a lot of the same wording from one to another because they're not going to see, one person's not going to see the one you wrote to somebody else. So, and sometimes you can pull out another one, an old one, and use that as a guide. But yeah, that's a great question.
Linda posted in the chat box that with her age, writing has gotten more difficult. And so she drafts it on and uses Word on her computer in a nice font and then cuts it, prints it. And I mean, that's a beautiful idea, and print it and pink it around and then put it inside a card. I think that's brilliant.
That is absolutely fabulous. I'm going to remember that and add that to my recommendation for people. Thank you so much for that great idea. Yeah, I think because it still maintains that excitement of the other person getting it out of the mailbox. And yet, and gosh, clearly something that you've taken the time, that you cared enough to spend the time on. One of my most cherished stacks of letters came from my grandfather, and he used an old-fashioned, not even electric typewriter to type them. So, they weren't handwritten, but I love those letters. Yes, please. I want advice and questions.
No. Hi. I mean, in your note, is it a bad idea to either give advice like, hey, it's a beautiful day, I was out for a walk, to give advice like that, or does that backfire? I've recently felt like it's backfiring, or to ask questions. Even how are you feels really intrusive, and they have to answer you. I mean, are there any rules? Are there any rules you can be open and say, but sometimes I think that the trouble is, I don't know if my instincts are right. Like I'm trying to anticipate how they're going to feel. I think they're going to love it, and maybe they don't love it.
But gosh, you mean they would tell you they didn't love it? That seems.
Yeah, they said, I don't want to hear it. Well, this was a verbal thing where they said, I don't want to hear advice. I find it insulting.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
So I mean, I've gotten negative energy from, you have to be careful, I think.
Well, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, Suzanne, because it does help when you know who you're writing to, and whether they're prickly or not. I have one grown child, my son, who is, he just, it seems like no matter what I say, he's going to take it wrong. So yeah, I hear you on that. And I would say, unfortunately, and I'm 73, very few people want unsolicited advice if you're really giving advice. But if you're just describing what your day is like or whatever, that I think would be fine. And as far as questions, if you're concerned about like, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
Rather than a question, perhaps just to say, I hope you're feeling well. I think of you often. That doesn't require a response, but it does sort of let them know that you are interested
in the topic
and how they're doing. That actually brings up another really important point, Suzanne, and this is hard, particularly with people you care about. And that is, we should write, how do I get rid of that? We should write without the expectation of I mean, we always want, I mean, I can't tell you how often I've written something thinking that I had just written a masterpiece and I was expecting some wonderful response, and it didn't come. And we just have to let go of that. And that's true in a lot of other areas of life as well. But write because you want to write, and write because you care about them, but don't set yourself up for disappointment by expecting something that may not come.
Can you talk more about the open heart part of notes?
Well, and some people would say that's a little woo-woo. But for me, it's part of spirituality. And I believe in the Holy Spirit, and I believe that when I ask, I don't necessarily get, oh, well, you need to say this. But I kind of trust that my instincts, and whether it's instincts or subconscious or whatever, but to do that, you have to just take a moment to open yourself to that, I think. So that's what I mean by that. And sometimes if it's a real touchy correspondence, it requires some actual prayer, and I'll go that route as well. But what I'm really talking about in my formula is literally a very short, just part of sort of a thing I go through almost now without even thinking about it. I'm looking at these comments over here. Oh, thanks, Ed, for putting the Facebook group link in there. Yeah, another, are we okay for time? Yeah, another story that I wanted to share with you. My husband is a retired physician, and when he was a young doctor, when we came here, there was a pharmacist, an older man who was a pharmacist. And of course, the pharmacists in a small rural town are pretty important. And the relationship between the doctors and the pharmacists are very important. And when, I guess my husband had been in practice 10 or 15 years when this pharmacist retired. And John wrote him a congratulations note on his retirement. And he said, Milson, I know that because my patients have told me how often you gave them a break on the cost of their medicine or gave them free medicine. And he said, I also know how often you delivered medicine at night and on weekends when you didn't have to do that. And by the way, I also know about the time that I made a mistake on a prescription and you called me and said, Doc, are you sure that's what you meant? And he saved me from making a mistake. And he said, I'll always remember that. Well, fortunately, this pharmacist lived another 15 or 20 years, and but did die at a ripe old age. And we went to the funeral home, and we had barely gotten in the door when one of his 5 grown children came running up to my husband and said, Dr. Cottrell, I cannot tell you how much it means to us for you to be here. And oh, by the way, we found your note to Dad that you wrote him when he retired. And it was in his Bible. It was in his Bible, and and his Bible was right by his chair, and he had read it and reread it. And then, of course, when they found it, each of those 5 children read it, and their spouses and their children, multiple grandchildren. So back to the idea of a ripple effect from that one letter. Now that whole family knew a side of their father they may not have, or grandfather, they might not have known otherwise. So I just love those stories that that show the power of taking that time. This has been great. Oh, here we go. The comment is about social media, and yes, I think that that has a absolute place. I think texting has a place. As a matter of fact, when something's time sensitive, those are much better ways to convey a message. And I even tell people, this doesn't apply to this group, but when you've been for a job interview, I recommend sending an immediate thank you email to let them know that you appreciated it, and then go home and write that personal note. So you can kind of use them together. But there's a role for everything, and particularly with time sensitive things, a lot of times convenience trumps the art. And Joyce, I'm so happy if anybody has any questions later, Let's see. Do you think the art of writing, cursive handwriting, could become a lost art? Well, of course, I worry about that, to be honest. There were a few years ago, there was a real move afoot, and some school systems took cursive writing out of their curriculum. And now I think there's a good bit of research showing that that actually the act of cursive writing has some extreme learning advantages, and I think they're beginning to reverse themselves on that. But I would say that if your grandchildren can't read cursive, you should learn to print. Try to meet them where they are. I don't think there's any better way to encourage children to write than for you to write to them. And hopefully, fortunately, there's a wonderful young woman whose name is Ashley Campbell. She founded a company called Cottrell and Blue, and it's stationery for children, and it's just delightful. And her goal is to just provide tools for families to teach their children to write notes. And I think as far as the whole art of letter writing, I actually am not hopeless about it. I think COVID sort of reminded us that we need other ways to connect. I see my daughter's 44 and she writes beautiful notes and writes a lot of them. So I don't know about the 20-somethings, but I'm not giving up hope yet. A lot of times what's old becomes new again. So we can always hope. Oh, we had our nephews write letters from the voice of the cat. We asked them what the cat would have said about the gift. I love that. That's great. And then I also have a friend whose granddaughter was about 3, and she told her mother, she said, I want to write a letter to grandma. So she was scribbling on this piece of paper and talking. And fortunately, the mother was recording it. And she said, well, honey, what are you saying? And so she was telling what she was writing down, which of course was entirely illegible. But so using video is a wonderful tool too. These are great questions. And by the way, I have just purchased Emily Post Etiquette's brand new, updated for the 21st century book. And I was fascinated to see that in what they advised about. And it was pulled together by her great granddaughter and her great nephew, or grandnephew or whatever, who are people in their early 40s. And they actually have a podcast called Awesome Etiquette, and they're delightful. They really have tried to shift the idea of etiquette into, this is not just, what you should do. This is sort of what makes life easier to understand each other. It helps us know what our expectations of each other are. And it should be based on thoughtfulness and kindness and not on mandates and rules. But what they say about addressing, because I get this a lot, is, should I do Mr. and Mrs. or Dr. and Mrs. or, MS or whatever. And what they say is, try to find out what the preference of the person you're writing to is, but it's perfectly okay now to just say John and Elizabeth Cottrell, 989 Black Bear Road, Maurytown, Virginia. And especially in informal writing, I think it might be a little different in a wedding invitation or something like that. But I think we get too hung up on rules sometimes.
There's some good questions in the chat box, Elizabeth.
Oh, okay. When I was very sick with my vasculitis, I'm in the hospital for 3 months in 2015. I got lots of cards and letters, and they kept me going. That's great. That's great. And it's hard to know what to say to somebody who's got a chronic, it's easy when they've got something they're going to get over. So sometimes people may not say things that seem very sensitive, but I think if you can look past that and just realize they were trying, I think that's great. What are your thoughts on writing a letter or note after having an argument with someone like a child or spouse? That is great. I think give it some time. I think to write in the heat of emotion is usually a mistake, although I don't think it hurts to write it. Just don't send it until you've calmed down and all that. I think when you can have a person-to-person resolution of a challenge like that, it's better. But on the other hand, sometimes it's not possible, or they won't talk to you, or whatever. I've had mixed results from it, to be honest. I've written notes that did make a difference, and I was glad I had. I've written notes that were pretty much ignored. So it's one of those tough things, but I in general feel that kindness dictates that we try to resolve those things, and it's usually worth the effort. Do you keep a regular journal? How often do you write in it? Yes, I keep more than one. I have a gratitude journal. It's not right here. Actually, both of my journals are this kind of, it's spiral, and it comes with a clear plastic, and that way I'm not artistic. I told you, I cut things out and decorate them, and then I write in them. But gratitude is just something I try to do every morning. I try to write down 5 things I'm grateful for, and some mornings, all I get is the roof over my head and my cup of coffee and that kind of thing. But other times, it's a lot more profound. This is my just sort of, I call it scribblings. It's just when I have things to write about and want to remember, because I blog. And so when I hear something that makes me think, I want to remember it, and I write it in here. And then I have, let's see if I can put my hands on it. I don't have it in front of me, but it's called a 5-year journal. And for every day, January 1st, there is room for 5 days, 5 years. And so you're looking at the ability to write about 2 or 3 sentences. And I like that because it just feels less intrusive, but it also gives me a way to document my life. And it's also fun because when you get 2 or 3 years into it, you can look back on that day and see what you were doing the year before and the year before that. And I get those from, I'm sure Amazon has them, but I get them from a company called Levenger. Well, yeah, you know what?
Elizabeth, I didn't understand what you meant. So you have space for 5 pages per year?
Yeah, so if you can see it or not.
Okay. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so this whole page is 1 day, but this is 1 year, this is 1 year, this is 1 year. So, and there's a little dark square to put the year in it. And so, and the reason I have a couple of extras is that when they first came out with this, all they made it in was gray. So my first 2 were gray, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if they had a different color for each one? And now they do. So when they came out with different colors, I bought 1 of each. And I thought I had a lot of journals, but I've heard somebody the other day who said she's just got like 8 or 10. I don't know how she keeps up with those, but when I was growing up, my grandfather, the same one that wrote me letters, gave me one of those beautiful sort of, they look like a legal book, a leather bound journal, and he had my name put on it, and he really encouraged me. And he journaled himself. Matter of fact, his journals are now in the University of South Carolina library, because he chronicled. He was born in 1879 and died in 1974. So he chronicled a lot of years of South Carolina history.
Mary Ann asked, do you ever go back and read your old journals?
Great question. Not as much as I should. I always think that I'm going to do that because I'm a writer. And so I feel like there's a lot of stuff in there I could mine for, deeper thinking. But unless I am actually trying to look something up, I rarely do. That I keep thinking I'm going to, but I don't very often. But I know they're there.
So do other people in the group, do you all journal? No?
I journal, but some of it is so private and so personal that I've thrown some of them out just because I don't want anybody else to read them.
I get that. And I think sometimes if that's the kind of thing you're going to do, either, you know, you can do it in a real, like a school notebook kind of thing. That's just, you know, not something that somebody's going to say, oh, that's a journal, I want to see what's in there. And I also, the thing about journaling, and I have started and stopped and started and stopped a jillion times in my life. And I've given up being judgmental with myself about that. I certainly, I have been pretty faithful with the gratitude journal for a good while now, but still miss a day from time to time. But I think when you set yourself, this is true for me with any kind of goal. If you set yourself too ambitious a goal, it just sets you up for failing. So just be kind to yourself, whatever you do. And deep cleaning, I sometimes find notes I wrote years ago, and it's wonderful. It is wonderful. And I have done that a couple of times. Exactly. Deep cleaning, decluttering. I come across notebooks that I stashed hither and yon, and it's like, it's wonderful in one way. In some other ways, guess what? I've always wanted to lose weight. I'm still wanting to lose weight. Haven't seemed to have cracked that nut yet. Any tips or ideas if someone wanted to chronicle or write about their disease journey or experience? No, except that just start. And I do think you probably could find, just with a little bit of Googling, you could find some templates, or even just think about it and brainstorm with yourself about, you know, what kind of things you want to talk about, or questions you want to ask yourself. And I guess the bigger piece is whether you're doing it for yourself or whether you're doing it to help others with the same condition. If you're thinking about ever publishing it, you know, that would be a bit of a different approach. And there again, I would say read a few other books of other people that have done that kind of thing. But I'd be glad to try to be more specific if you have a more specific question. But I think to chronicle your disease journey, I would think would be really helpful to keep it from festering inside of you. And I was very touched in the book that I mentioned, the From Me to You. The man who had cancer was extremely honest in his journals. Of course, he had no idea he was going to put it in a book, about details about the, you know, colostomy bag and, you know, all kinds of things. But, you know, I think he found it, you know, extremely helpful to be able to be honest with his journal if he couldn't be honest with anybody else. My journaling is boring, more like random thoughts of what I've done or feel, but nothing very profound or probing. That's okay. And that's your opinion. You know, it could be somebody else would have an entirely different approach to it. But it's a conversation, and it's healing to get it out. And I think I've actually heard people say, writers particularly say, I don't know what I think until I've written it down. They find writing to be a way of processing life that they find helpful. Yes, on my journey with this disease, a prayer journal about my life started when I was 30 years old. So it's been 25 years. Wow. Yeah. And I can't help but think that there are people out there that would benefit from that if you choose to either share it as a book or as articles or whatever, because anytime somebody's going through something and they find out somebody else has gone through it, it makes you feel less alone, I would think. So good luck with that. The publishing journey is interesting. I've never published a book before. This is the book that I published in last year. Probably would never have happened without my daughter. I had been talking about it. People had been saying, "Oh, you write such great notes. Why don't you write a book?" And that simmered in my subconscious. But April of 2020, my daughter called me for my 70th birthday. She said, "Mom, I know your calendar has just gone from completely full to completely empty like everybody else's. And I want you to get that darn book out of your head. And to make sure that you do for your birthday, I'm giving you some time with my friend who's an accountability coach. And she's going to call you every Friday to see how you're doing." And she did. And I got that book written that first year of COVID. And then it took me another year to figure out what to do with it. But it's always a journey. This has been delightful. You guys are great. I love having questions.
I think because we all have a rare disease that is hard to explain to other people, journaling is a great way of processing what we're going through.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Mary Ann. I think you're probably right. And I think that a lot of people could benefit. The thing that, again, I don't think anybody should say because I think this or Mary Ann thinks this or anybody does. What's right for one person is not going to be right for everybody. And so give yourself some grace, some space, some slack. I think we're all so hard on ourselves, and I don't know why that is, but we are. And we need to take care of ourselves. Well, I hope these handouts that you get will be helpful. And again, I think they all have contact information for me, but Joyce, if they don't, please feel free to give them my email. If anybody would like to, email me, I'd be delighted to answer any questions.
Yes. Do we have any final questions or comments?
That's
Suzanne,
hilarious.
Suzanne, did you have a comment? You're on mute if you do.
I guess mostly to Elizabeth. I write notes, but mostly email. And I just wonder how much of your personal correspondence is email?
A lot of it. And although I have to say probably more of my business correspondence, but I don't write every day notes. I batch. So I'm sure I write an average of way more than 1 or 2 notes a day, but I don't, some days I'll write 5 or 6 and then I'll go 2 or 3 days and not write any. But there's nothing wrong with email. Email is a way to connect. And I think it's a wonderful way to connect. And so there's a role for it. And my gosh, my email inbox is always crazy.
I think the elder George Bush was a big handwritten note writer.
I have a book on my shelf. I'm looking at it. It's called All the Best, and it is a collection of his notes and letters. And he wrote prolifically, and he signed his notes All the Best. He sure did.
Oh, that's nice.
And one of you had a question about the cursive, and was I worried about it being a lost art? One thing I do worry about, and that is what on earth are future historians going to do without the notes? And Joyce, even your father's journals are a way to sort of get a snapshot of what life was like, what farming life was like at that time. Mm-hmm. So at any rate, I think I do worry about that. I don't envy historians trying to wade through emails.
I just want to say thank you, Elizabeth, so much for joining us tonight. What a great discussion.